true, and this next attack is even faster than the last one. A blue slime? Roaring sanctuary!
After dying from his previous life, he tried to rizz up. God somehow succeeded. Because she was so starstruck by Kelvin, she gave him another chance at life, this time as a summoning master. Now with his newfound power, he ventures the world with hope that one day he will be able to meet the beautiful goddess again. Episode 1. Once he lands on the new world, all he can think about is getting himself a bite to eat. Because of this, he gets up and starts looking around, wondering if God gave him any useful skills. He then sees a status window guiding him on how to manage his new reincarnated life. After clicking it, the window starts flying around Kevlin, telling him he has reincarnated. However, he has forgotten spitting game on the goddess. It then opens up his status window, showing that Kelvin is not only a summoner, but also has decent base stats. With him now understanding his skills, he heads on a journey alongside his status window. Being as the status window has a female voice, he wonders why this thing is calling itself the goddess of reincarnation. He then arrives into town where he finds various people in different outfits, revealing this is a magical world. Apparently, according to Kelvin, when he first saw the goddess, he proposed his love for her, eventually rizzing her up. Because his game was so strong, she tells him that she reincarnated him without hesitation, making him one of her chosen ones. Once Kelvin learns all of this, he demands for his memories back, but she informs him that he exchanged his memories for VC. With him having no previous memories, he wonders what VC even is, but she keeps him thinking. He eventually thinks so hard smoke comes out of his head, so he runs around the town like a maniac to help diminish his public image. Following this, he talks to himself as he walks around town, looking for somewhere he can get drunk. He eventually sees the guild, so he takes a stop at it before the bar. Once he enters the guild, he realizes it's no joke with people swarming the counters and staring at the guild board. After waiting in line for a bit, he finally gets to the front where he tries to seduce the clerk. He spits some game on her, but as he fills out his application, the goddess tells him to hide his identity as a summoner. She explains that summoners are usually from another country, so it would draw suspicion if he wrote it down. He follows this and turns in his paper, hoping to get a normal response back. After a few minutes, the clerk comes back out and presents him with an F-rank guild adventurer class. She shows the differences in the ranks, telling him he is the weakest in the whole guild currently. She tells him she would never date such a low-ranking guild member, so he ought to raise his rank. By completing 10 quests in a row without fail, you move up 1 rank and are eligible for a rank-up quest. He continues to speak to the girl, making the people behind him get impatient as he looks at the low-level quests. Before we continue, let's take a moment to answer the question of the day. What is your favorite part of anime recaps? Comment down below for a chance to be shouted out in the next video. Now, back to the recap. Upon inspecting the papers, he takes on the blue slime quest, hoping to use it on the harem he is soon to build. Following this, he heads to a shop in town to purchase a small rod that he can use to hook old people. With his new equipment, he heads into the forest where he easily finds the small slimes. Upon inspection, he realizes they are the lowest ranked monster, so he should have no trouble dealing with it. The goddess explains that this eye gives him the power to analyze anyone in the world under level 100. After learning this, he tries to combine his new power with his old strength. With his little hook in hand, he is confident he can capture one of these slimes. The goddess explains to him that if he weakens it first, then he should be able to capture it after, like Pokemon. Once he hears this, he charges out of the bushes and strikes the slime, but it evades his attack with ease, then smacks him in the face, knocking him down in the process, making Kelvin wonder why he is so weak. The slime then starts taunting him, jumping around as if he could never be hit. This agitates Kelvin, so he charges in, but he suffers the same fate and gets worked by the slime. Eventually, he realizes this isn't working, so he switches his attack strategy up this time. Instead of striking once, he swings around like a helicopter, eventually landing a hit on the slime. With its low HP, he then begins to try his summoning skill on the slime. Upon using it, his energy gets drained, but the slime becomes the first addition to his team to defeat the Elite Four. Following this, the goddess tells him to name his slime, so he decides on Clotho, hoping to use it to melt others' clothes one day. After he decides on this name, the slime's energy begins pulsing through Kelvin's body, making him ready to capture some more monsters. Before he does, however, he decides to summon Clotho to hopefully use as a shield for him. After seeing the slime ready for battle, he wonders what it will even do for him other than be a meat shield. He then heads into the forest to find a new monster to test Clotho out on. After searching for some time, he finds more slimes, so he attacks them. With his first attack taking it down, Clotho handles the other one, taking it down instantly. Once the battle ends, Kelvin wonders why the slime is so powerful now, to which the goddess explains anything that he tames will get an additional 100 stat points. She then explains to him that he is the only person with S-rank summoning skills, telling him most summoners only have C or B rank. As he flirts with the goddess, his slime goes and defeats more slimes, thus powering Kelvin up even more. He then goes and sells the slimes for some chump change, hoping to have enough for a beer or two. The goddess tells him to buy a weapon before drinks, but he ignores her and continues looking around. He eventually stumbles upon a group of slaves in an alley, so he decides to stare at them. The merchant in charge of them tells the buyers that he has recently acquired some special goods. He presents a blonde elf and asks who is interested in her. But while he is talking, Kelvin makes eye contact. As if she is begging for help with her eyes, he wonders if he should help her, but he remembers the beer. He leaves her and goes to the nearest inn and prays that his chump change is enough for a night. Because he is unsure, he compliments the innkeeper, which leads to her offering him a free dinner meal. He then heads to his room and wonders why he doesn't have a bathroom in his room. As he thinks of taking a dump, his stomach rumbles, so he heads downstairs to try out the food they have to offer. Without wasting time, he scarfs everything he can down, thinking about all the adventures he is soon to have. Episode 2. After getting accustomed to his stats, he takes on stronger quests, raising him and Clotho's levels. Thanks to his goddess, he has the typical Op Extra Exp ability, giving him a significant advantage to other adventurers. As a reward for clearing the quests, he is promoted to the E rank, one step up from the F rank. After this happens, other guild members wonder how a solo is able to level up so fast. Even the clerk thinks he is too strong, asking him if he was a palace mage before coming to the guild. He tells her that he is just a simple man who happens to be strong, nothing as special as a palace mage. He then asks her what the next quests he can receive are, but he is interrupted by a blonde man named Cashel. He acts all proud and mighty, treating Kelvin like the low level he is. He flexes, completing a C-rank quest to the clerk, then offers a handshake to Kelvin. He introduces himself as a D-rank adventurer, but after he does, other guild members talk badly about him. They call him a rookie crusher who actually has the strength of a B-rank adventurer. He then offers Kelvin to join him on a D-rank quest, but the clerk protests, telling Cashel that Kelvin is too low level to take on the quest. Following this, Kelvin denies his request, but after inspecting his stats, he learns his true intentions. With him having the title of murderer, he decides to play with him a bit. He offers a challenge to Cashel, telling him that whoever can defeat the quest monster first wins. Cashel accepts his request, thinking he will have an easy victory, still unknowing to Kelvin's true strength. After he does this, the guild clerks talk amongst each other, calling Kelvin an idiot for overestimating himself. Cashel, on the other hand, talks with his grunts who inform him he is at least a C rank in terms of skill. Another one of the grunts, Raji, proposes that he do all the fighting and crush Kelvin himself. Cashel tells him not to get ahead of himself, Kelvin's true strength not being known. After this happens, they head into the dungeon to hopefully slay the monster. But once they arrive, the area is cleared. Kelvin then emerges before the party and asks them what took them so long. He tells them that the Black Knight was too easy, informing him that it wasn't much of a challenge. Raji then protests his claims, telling him it must have already been defeated. Once he hears this, Kelvin exposes the group, telling them to come at him already. Cashel asks how he knows of his identity, asking if he is an assassin or a bounty hunter. Kelvin then reminds them that they approached him first, telling the fat, ugly grunt Raji to come at him. This enrages him, so he rushes Kelvin, but before he can get within 5 feet, he gets trapped by a binding skill. After he uses this skill, Cashel realizes he has a concealment skill, thus not being able to see his skills beforehand. Kelvin then uses a magic slash on them, which causes one of the grunts to run away in fear. Cashel doesn't back down so easily, however, preparing to fight against Kelvin himself. While the other runs away, Kelvin summons Clotho to push him back into the room in which they are. A few days before this happened, Clotho ended up evolving after reaching a certain level. By changing from a slime to a slime glutton, he's become a monster in terms of one of the Demon King's strongest subordinates. With this powered-up slime, he easily defeats the two grunts by Cashel's side. This causes him to rush Kelvin, but he suffers a similar fate, getting his face smashed in. Once the battle ends, Kelvin wonders how someone similar to a B rank can be so weak. He then heads deeper into the dungeon to face off against the real boss. Once he enters the room, a knight asks Kelvin what he is doing in his room, revealing he can speak with humans. Kelvin responds to him, and this starts a friendship between the two, with the knight explaining his past. He tells Kelvin that he used to be a human, but somehow ended up as a monster. He tells Kelvin that he doesn't know what his purpose is, just standing around all day defending the area. The knight then gives him some expired candy which makes Kelvin mad, so he throws it back at him. He then asks the knight if he wants to form a pact with him to continue his life outside of the dungeon. The knight, however, tells Kelvin that he needs to see his strength before he becomes his underling. With this, the two begin their fight with the knight introducing himself as Gerald, a previous knight captain. Kelvin tries to use his slime's power, but it gets overwhelmed with ease. Although it gets evaded, he decides to take the confusion to his advantage, landing a blow on Gerald. After this strike, he doesn't let up, sending in as many attacks as he can. After clashing swords, Kelvin eventually uses his strongest spell, restricting all of Gerald's movements. And as he fights, Gerald starts to remember his past life as a human. With him being the king's knight, he lost his life protecting the king from an elven diplomat, with the elf starting off by killing his friends and family. This causes Gerald to only have one last hope, his child. With this rage from his previous life, he powers up, forcing Kelvin on the defense. He takes advantage of this ego Gerald acquired, however, ordering Clotho to attack from behind. The following day, he goes and presents the Black Knight's head to the guild, which earns him a rank up. Because of how difficult the quest was, and him doing it solo, Kelvin is invited to talk with the guildmaster about his rank. Once he heads up the stairs to the office, he finds an old man looking off into the distance. Episode 3. The old geezer talks enthusiastically to Kelvin, treating him like a small child rather than an adventurer. He then introduces himself as Leo, the guildmaster of the Adventurers Guild. Following this, he asks Kelvin if he is from another world while using his appraising eye. Kelvin uses his back and realizes because of the guildmaster's high rank, he is able to see through all of Kelvin's defense. With this, he brings Kelvin into his office where he exposes all of the tricks that Kelvin has been hiding. With the guildmaster having an A-rank appraisal eye, Kelvin wonders what he should do in this situation. Following this, all of his servants remind him that he doesn't always have to hide his stats from the world. Kelvin realizes this, so he confesses to the guildmaster, asking why he never did anything to Cashel. Kelvin then moves on to asking Leo what his true intentions are with him. Leo explains that he has met people like him before, heroes from another empire who were from another world. Once he says this, the goddess confesses to Kelvin, telling her that she was the one who did that. Leo then informs him that after the heroes descended, they received a message telling them the Demon King will soon return to their world. He tells Kelvin that with him defeating powerful monsters and enslaving them, a lot of people will suspect him of being the Demon King. In exchange for not revealing his identity, Leo asks him to help him with some quests that he has that he can't give to others. He then tells Kelvin that after checking his stats, he knows that he is already at the S rank. Leo then offers to help him climb to the top of the guild and promote all the way to S rank. Following this, when he heads back to his inn, his clerk is stunned to learn he has already become a B rank. With the guildmaster planning to gradually raise his rank, Kelvin is still not at his full power. Kelvin then heads up to his room with the free snacks the lady gives him. Instead of socializing with the women, he heads into his room and eats 3 sandwiches by himself. The goddess asks him why he acts so serious even though he has been in the world for so long, but refuses to answer. Instead, he thinks of when Leo acted like he was the Demon King, wishing he had that much power. After he finishes all 3 sandwiches by himself, he lies around in his bed thinking about his battles. This makes him excited, so summons his slime slave, asking him to empty his pockets. The slime reluctantly hands over his money to Kelvin, not knowing that he plans on going shopping with his money. As he walks down the street, he walks with pride, finally deciding to purchase the elf slave to become his own. They ask him what got into him to want to buy a slave, to which he explains the beauty of the blonde elf girl. He tells them that no one else is like her, and she even gives him a seductive glance from afar. Eventually, he arrives at the slave's place, where he sees a man being burned alive from one of the slaves. He runs off telling the slave master she is cursed, but when Kelvin goes to inspect her, he is surprised. He sees a curse placed by the fire dragon, so he decides to try and figure out how to cure it. After staring at the elf girl for a bit, he walks away, leaving her alone yet another day. Just as the slave master thinks he has no chance at selling the elf girl, Kelvin reemerges. He hands the slave master a bag of money and tells him he doesn't care about the curse. Following this, he heads into the cage and tells her to get out already, him being her new master. They then walk back to the inn until the elf girl stops and finally introduces herself as Eiffel. Kelvin then introduces himself as an adventurer and asks Eiffel to join his party. She tells him that she has been a slave since birth, but doesn't know why she's a slave or why she is cursed. Kelvin then tells her to calm down, putting his hand on her head and releasing the curse. He informs her that she no longer has to live like a slave, formally inviting her to his party not as a slave, but as an equal. This brings her to tears, so she gets on her knees for him, showing that she will always repay him when needed. Following this, they head back to the inn, where Kelvin introduces his new girlfriend to the clerk. She is suspicious at first with how secretive he is asking, so she rushes towards Eiffel. Eiffel backs up, but thanks to Kelvin's help, she learns how to make contact with someone. She grabs the clerk's hand, but to her surprise, she kidnaps her in order to dress her properly. Time goes by and Kelvin gets bored, waiting until Eiffel is finally reintroduced. Wearing a purple maid dress, Kelvin realizes just how good of a purchase he made. He tells her she is pretty, and that he is looking forward to working with her in the future. The clerk finally does her job and makes his food for him, causing Eiffel to offer to help. After this happens, Kelvin heads to bed with Eiffel, wondering if he should make a move on her or not. He thinks about it, but remembers how hard it was for her to simply hold another's hand, so he resists for now. Episode 4. As time went on, Kelvin not only raised his own level, but also Eiffel's, making her able to fight alongside him. Whether it's her magic or beauty, she brings a lot to the table, making Kelvin realize how good of a decision he made in purchasing her. Once they finish their quest, they head back to the guild to claim their rewards. With this being Kelvin's 9th consecutive successful quest, he is one away from being promoted to the A rank. While this happens, Eiffel explains how she rose all the way to C rank, defeating a higher-ranked adventurer with ease. With her adapting to her new world, the clerk invites Eiffel to hang out with her. After hearing this, Eiffel nervously invites Kelvin to join alongside them, hoping to win him over a bit more. Later that day, Kelvin waits in the town center, realizing Eiffel set him up with a date. Then suddenly Angie, the guild clerk, arrives, impressing Kelvin. She asks where Eiffel is, to which Kelvin explains that she is currently getting ready, spending more time than anyone else. Then finally she meets with the others in a new white and blue dress befitting her figure. Kelvin gets star-struck by her emergence, while Angie realizes she doesn't stand a chance. Instead of going after Kelvin, she switches to trying to befriend Eiffel. Once they finish their greetings, they move on to eating at a cafe. While they eat, random people notice Kelvin eating with 2 beautiful women, so they get jealous. For some reason, Kelvin denies that they are both his girls, wanting his public image to stay good. Despite his attempts, however, the people seem more and more invested in Kelvin's love life until someone new arrives. A fat, ugly blonde man emerges and is introduced to the 3rd prince, Tabura. Although he isn't the prince of this kingdom, he still holds vast influence in the world as a high-ranking noble. Because of this, he thinks he can simply order Kelvin to hand over his girls. Kelvin has other plans, however, punching the prince's guards into oblivion and forcing the prince to realize his strength. He pleads for his life, telling Kelvin if he harms him, he will send his army on him. But Kelvin continues. He questions the prince's objective, so he explains it to Kelvin. He tells him that he heard a new adventurer appeared with beautiful women, so he wanted to see what his girls were about. After the girls hear this, they realize he is the lowest of the low's ultimate trash. In a last effort, the prince attempts to enlist Kelvin to work for him, but he just kills the fat prince instead. Eiffel sees his courage after he stood up to them for her, so she becomes more invested in him. While this happens, a priestess named Colette prays to the resurrection goddess. After getting heard by the goddess, she shows off the heroes that were originally brought into the world. The goddess tells her that she is impressed, but they need to continue growing in order to defeat the Demon King soon emerging in the west. After this happens, she calls the heroes and informs them that they have a new mission. While this happens, Kelvin sleeps with Eiffel, still acting hesitant to make a move on her. Instead of apologizing to her, telling her if he could get a bigger bed, he would. After she hears this, Eiffel finally makes a move on Kelvin, asking him why he never makes an advancement on her. She tells him she loves him as her master and as a man because of everything he has done for her. She explains that without him, she would be some worthless, cursed slave, so he is her savior. Once Kelvin hears this, he goes in for a kiss, but realizes as a slave it feels wrong to do anything to her. He tells her that he likes her too, but he doesn't make a move, causing Eiffel to jump onto him. After an eventful night, Kelvin talks with his monsters about the various stats the heroes have. Thanks to the goddess, he is able to see all of their stat windows, but to his surprise, they are all low level. Kelvin wonders how heroes summoned over a year ago have only reached around a DB rank adventurer. Even the goddess tells him that she is disappointed in the heroes, wishing she wouldn't have had to summon Kelvin. Before he heads out for the day, Kelvin reviews his equipment until he is called to meet with the guildmaster. Here he explains that inside of a dungeon a demon was found, but it was sealed so no one died. Despite this, it is still a hazard, earning it the level of an S-rank quest. Following this, he asks Kelvin about what he did to the prince. He tells Kelvin that he has a lot of work on his hands, having to find the culprit of whoever beat up the prince. He then asks Kelvin to take on the quest within the hermit's cave, with the demon sealed. Kelvin accepts and heads over to the dungeon where he finds various other adventurers waiting for his arrival. They explain that they currently have a barrier trapping the demon inside, but aren't sure how long it will hold. He then guides Kelvin to where the demon is sealed, urging him to be careful entering. Despite his warnings, Kelvin enters without any hesitation, hoping the demon is a girl. Eventually, he arrives at the boss room door, making him sure that this is where the demon is sealed. As he wished, once he enters, he sees a beautiful red-haired girl being tied up on an altar. Following this, another demon welcomes them into the dungeon, introducing himself as an archdemon Victor. Thanks to Kelvin's extensive knowledge, he knows an archdemon ranks up to the likes of an AS rank adventurer party. Victor then begins to set his trap, closing the doors and encasing the area in a barrier to keep them locked in. He explains that the girl before them is the daughter of the past demon king. He tells Kelvin that he was hoping to bait others, but ended up with a strong human for dinner. He then rushes towards them, but is stopped by Gerald with his knight's shield. Victor then reveals that with every human he eats, he gains their power and levels up. Because of this, Victor has lured various people into the dungeon, hoping to eventually become the Demon King himself. Following this explanation, Kelvin gets filled with joy after finally having an opponent who can bring out his true strength. Gerald explains that the more powerful the enemy he faces off against, the stronger he becomes, earning him the title of a battle junkie. Before we continue, let's take a moment to shout out the winner of the last video's top comment. User is 2mo3xy4te. Comment down below for a chance to be shouted out in the next video. Let's get back to the recap. Episode 5. Once Victor sees his enthusiasm, he decides to step his magic up a level, bringing the skeletons to life in the area. Thanks to Kelvin's leveling up, however, he's able to make quick work of the skeletons, defeating them with ease. As they continue fighting, Victor watches, realizing that Kelvin isn't just all talk. Once they defeat all the skeletons, Kelvin faces off against Victor, asking him what he is waiting for. With Kelvin smiling through this, all Victor gets ticked off, so he finally strikes, but he gets stopped by Gerald. He follows this with a counterattack, and the two continue exchanging blows until Victor overpowers him. He then moves on to attacking Kelvin, swinging his slimy arms at him. Before he gets hit, however, Kelvin calls upon Clotho, who drains Victor's magic. With these attacks, Victor finally decides to take the fight seriously, powering himself up. He then uses his arm to try and attack Kelvin from behind, but he is one step ahead, calling upon Eiffel to initiate her attack. Gerald follows this with an attack of his own, taking off one of the demon's arms. Despite these attacks, Victor is still smiling, being happy to finally get a good fight after a while. Kelvin tells him to surrender, but Victor has other plans, powering up once again, this time as his final form. Once the party sees this, they waste no time and launch an onslaught of attacks at Victor. With their constant pressure against Victor, they land a few hits at a time, gradually weakening Victor's defenses. Victor, however, doesn't seem to know this, thinking that his victory is already assured. Following this, Clotho emerges from above and sends in all the stored weapons at Victor, immobilizing him. To add to this attack, the other party members send in their strongest attacks as well, knocking Victor to the ground. Because of this attack, the ceiling begins to crumble, causing a piece of rubble to fall onto the Demon King's daughter. Before it hits her, however, Victor stops the attack, revealing his true intentions are different than what he told. Kelvin asks him why he lied, to which Victor explains that he simply wanted to enrage his opponent to bring out their true strength. He tells us of this past, having worked as the Demon King's trainer since a young age, with him treating her like his own daughter. When the day that the Demon King's castle was raided arrives, he saved her. Because of her presence, however, she has been sealed this time so that the humans don't come after her. He had objected to this originally, asking the Demon King how he could lock his daughter Sira up for ages. Despite this, however, he has spent the past few centuries protecting Sira from any attackers, hoping that one day she would become the Demon Lord. Once he finishes his story, he asks Kelvin with his final breaths to take her on as his companion, knowing that he can form a pact with her with his job class. He tells her that she may be a bit confused at first, but at heart she is a sweet girl. Kelvin then asks Victor if he wants to become his servant as well, but he declines, informing him he has already pledged allegiance to the past Demon King. After this happens, he dies, releasing the barrier that locked them within the dungeon. With this, Kelvin walks over to the altar and releases the seal placed upon Sira. Once she wakes up, she begins mourning the loss of her companions. He takes the crybaby with him anyways and heads out of the dungeon. Here he provides a piece of Victor's armor as proof he defeated him, along with an explanation for Sira's presence. He hides the fact that she is a demon, but rather tells the adventurer that he is planning on taking her back to his inn. While he talks with him, Gerald ends up evolving into a new form, the Hades Knight Captain. With this evolution, the goddess explains that he is now on par with an S-rank monster found in a dungeon. He then approaches Sira and formally asks her to join his party despite her being a demon. She accepts and joins him to venture deeper into the city, to explore the various goods that are sold. With her never being able to venture into a human city, she has plenty of things to do around town. Because of this, Kelvin leaves her to wander, heading to the guild instead. Once he enters, a party is thrown for his celebration in earning A rank because he cleared the demon quest. Later that night, once the party is finished, Kelvin notices Sarah is missing, so he looks around for her. While he looks, Sarah is seen remembering her fond memories, growing up with Victor as her guide. Episode 6. Following this, the next day, Kelvin announces to the others that he has recently upgraded his blacksmith skill to the S rank, allowing him to provide new armor. He starts with Sarah, giving her armor befitting a demon king's daughter. For Gerald, he crafted a demon slayer sword that has the same quality, it being an S rank sword. Sarah asks where Ifil's new stuff is, but he tells her it's a secret, showing who is his favorite. Ifil then offers to cook him something to eat, which causes him to strive for rice. He misses his rice so much that he decides to venture out into a new land to find some rice. As they ride the carriage together, he reveals that the rice isn't his only goal, him having promised Victor to help Sarah explore the world. He explains that somehow Leo, the guildmaster, allowed them to just leave the town and go wherever they want. He also informs his party that the previous night he woke up hungover while receiving a message from the goddess. She tells him that with his current strength, he should almost be able to spawn in the goddess to become his own plaything. After he explains this, Sarah asks Kelvin why he hasn't dealt with the various people watching them from afar. He tells her that he can stop them anytime, so he doesn't need to move, and as soon as he says this, bandits emerge from the bushes. They introduce themselves as Black Wind, a notorious group of bandits that defeated a party of A-rank adventurers. Upon hearing this, he inspects their levels and finds that they are pretty low level compared to himself. Because of this, he sends in Sarah to show off their strength to the others, hoping to have her prove her worth. The bandits act confident, but once Sarah knocks one out with a single hit, she realizes their situation. The bandit leader sends in all of her grunts, but they suffer a similar fate as the others, being knocked out one by one. Eventually, some big ugly giant emerges and tries to overpower her with strength, but Sarah deals with him with ease. Because of this, the bandit leader falls to her knees and backs up, revealing she is defeated without even fighting. Despite getting whooped by a single member of Kelvin's party, she's still confident that her boss, a level 70, can defeat them. Once Kelvin hears this, he decides to use her to show him where the strong is, hoping to make a name in the new town. Before this, they arrive at the guild of this town where they meet with the guildmaster. She introduces herself as Mist and thanks Kelvin for defeating the Black Wind for her. He informs her that it was an easy feat, hardly recognizable among his many achievements. She then explains that over 20 years ago, before she was an old hag, she used to get around, even being in a party with Leo. After telling them of her past, she moves on to the main subject, telling Kelvin that although the minions were defeated, their boss still remains. Because of this, she asks Kelvin to deal with him, offering to propose a reward if he wins. Following this, he thinks of and suddenly detects a group of mid-level adventurers in the city. After thinking about who they could be, he learns they are the heroes party summoned over a year ago. Following this, the heroes party arrive at the guild and talk with Mist about the bandits. Before this happened, however, Kelvin proposed a trap to her, wanting to lure the heroes into the dungeon to fight them himself. Within a dungeon deep underground, there lies various imprisoned girls. With the warden being a gay, emo-looking dude, anyone would get scared by just his presence. As he tries to bring one of the slaves to be his plaything, Kelvin and his party enter the dungeon. They give the pervert no time to explain himself, rather knocking him down instantly. While this happens, Christopher, the leader of the bandits, meets with his main girl regarding their current situation. She tells him that with their people getting taken down one by one, they will eventually lose all their power. She asks him to deal with them already, to which Christopher tells them confidently he already did deal with them. Just as he says this, the man he was talking about enters the room and faints instantly. Following this, Kelvin's party enters the room and begins their battle against the thugs. Christopher, the thug leader, tells them that he will defeat them with ease. But Kelvin has other plans, not caring about them, but rather the heroes. As we speak about this, the heroes are seen entering the dungeon in hopes of defeating the bandits themselves. After traversing the dungeon, they find a door at the end of the path, causing them to be on their guard. Once they enter the room, to their surprise, a large slime is seen guarding the area. The hero tries to fight the slime, but some random peasant gets in between them, telling the heroes the slime is a good guy. Once he learns this, the hero lowers his guard and introduces himself as Tuya, the hero. After this happens, they inspect the slime and learn that it was stationed there to protect the slaves from a stronger force deeper within the dungeon. Because of this, they rush into battle without forming a plan, causing them to be stunned once they enter. They see a group of defeated people, assuming they are the adventurers and not the bandits. After this, they continue exploring the dungeon until they find Kelvin posted up with his allies in preparation to fight.